Well, hello there. Hello there. Good morning, as we say here in Britain. Good morning. It's not exclusive to Britain. I'm sure they say that or a variant of that all around the world when it is morning. It's me, and I'm back, and I'm kind of glowing a bit. I shouldn't have worn a white shirt, really, should I? That was a mistake, because now I'm going to be glowing even more. I'm here with my face, and yeah, here for another instalment of The Devil's Engine. We are getting quite close to the end now. I feel like this is the last stretch towards the end line. I'm sure those are sporting terms. I was never really much of a sportsman, but the last stretch towards the ending line seems like it's something that sporty people might say. So, it's quite complicated, this story, and I'm just reminding myself how complicated it is. But basically, Marlowe and Pan got back from hell. They opened the door. The devils come after them. They were also carrying the devil's heart. The devil's heart is a piece of it, basically like its own mini engine that helps it circulate whatever it is that keeps it alive. They've got this in an unopenable canister that was designed by the watchmaker. And they've gone off to try and find out a way of opening it, whereas Herc and Pan have gone off to try and find a way to slow down the devil, who's basically chasing Marlowe and Charlie. Ostime's dead. And Marlowe and Charlie crashed a big rig into Walmart, and then there was a big explosion. They don't know what the big explosion was. We're about to find out. And what was I going to say? I've forgotten. It's too early. And Marlowe has realised, because he was covered in blood because he got knocked about by the explosion, that he's realised that if he puts his hand on the mechanism of the canister, it's opened. And this heart has basically stretched out these little veiny tendril things and attached itself to his arm. And he doesn't really know why this heart has attached itself to him. But I'm sure we will find out in the next few chapters. That is gross. Truth kills. If the view from the ground had been bad... Pan and Herc have just gone up in a helicopter, by the way. The view from up here was worse. Pan stared through her gaunt reflection at the burning world beneath her. The destruction was limited, but it was spreading fast. The devil was a pocket of seemingly infinite absence, one that carved a path away from the harbour and through the vast warehouses that sat next to it. A churning cloud of smoke and debris revolved around it, so Herc was keeping them to the sides at a steady 200 feet, low enough to make out the people on the street below. Low enough to see Marlowe and Charlie trying to get themselves killed. "What the hell are they doing?" she said, speaking into the mic of her headphone set. They were running with the canister, almost getting hit by a silver car. Marlowe dropped his end, scrabbling for it. They looked like two of the Three Stooges trying to carry a ladder, and at this rate they were both going to be dead in about 4 seconds. Herc had obviously seen it too, because he spun the chopper in a wide, lazy circle. "If you're going to get this weapon of yours, you better do it fast," she said. His growled reply was fed into her headphones. "Huh? I said there's no time. God damn it." "Oh, sorry. I said there's no time, god damn it. The nearest weapons cache we have is in Queens. By the time we get halfway there, Marlowe's going to be toast." Pan ran a hand through the knotted mess of her hair. "There must be something else," she said. "Come on, Herc. No pressure or anything, but the whole world is counting on there being something else." He angled around again, and it took Pan a second to find them. "Can Charlie drive a truck?" she asked. But the boy answered her, the semi swinging around in a wide arc and dragging its trailer behind it. It had to be the slowest mode of transport they could find. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Then the semi started thumping through the motionless traffic, and she took the words back. The roads were pretty clogged, and the devil was fast, but at least in a truck they might be able to shake him off. They'd stand more of a chance if Herc could think of a plan. "Anything?" she said. "Something," he replied. I've just remembered what happens in this chapter. It's really sad. He wasn't sharing, though. Instead, he pushed the stick and followed the devil, staying low. She looked out over the buildings of Jersey, New York glittering on the other side of the bay. How long before everything fell, before the whole country turned to ash? And suddenly she was thinking of her old house, over the East River. She wondered if her foster mum was still there, if she still thought about her missing child. Christoph's apartment was out there too. It was like a punch to the gut, the knowledge that all of this had started there, with her hand wrapped around the cold metal base of a table lamp. Thunk. Thud. "Hey, Pam," said Herc. "You still with me?" She realised he was waiting for an answer to a question she hadn't heard. She stared at him until he repeated it. "They still alive?" "Yeah," she said, watching the 18-wheeler smash its way through traffic. The roads were opening up as they tore south into Bayonne. I don't know if that's how you say Bayonne. Whoever was driving, pulling them onto what looked like the 440. Her stomach lurched as Herc accelerated after them. She could feel him looking at her, and when she turned to him again, he was wearing an expression that was 1 part misery to 2 parts guilt. "You was something else there," he said. "Want to tell me where?" "Home," she said, shrugging. "Just thinking back. Never actually thought it would lead me here." "Christoph," he said. And when she nodded, something shifted in his expression. He took a deep breath, like he was about to dive out the door. "Look," he said, not meeting her eye. "I never planned to tell you this, but it's changed, hasn't it? Everything's changed." "What are you talking about, Herc?" she said. "Maybe there's something you need to know," he replied, clearing his throat. "Maybe there's something you need to know, and I don't know if I'll get another chance to tell you." "Herc," she said, trying to laugh. "I know you love me, but it's your face. I could never love somebody with a face like—" "It's about Christoph," he said. And she clamped her mouth shut. Christoph was dead. Christoph was long buried. Christoph was nothing but a memory. Herc finally turned to face her. He looked old, like 1 foot in the grave old. "You have to understand. We needed engineers. We were losing the war. We were losing too many people." He stalled, his red eyes blinking like he was trying to send her a message in Morse code. "I didn't think you'd say yes unless—" "Unless what, Herc?" she said. Her palms were stinging, and she realised her fists were bunched, nails digging into the flesh. "Unless you thought you didn't have a choice." Choices. It's what Herc had offered her when he'd walked into her cell that day. She'd been 13. She'd just killed a man. It had been self-defence, but the cops hadn't exactly gone easy on her. What had the detective told her? Juvie, prison, and a life flushed down the cam. Then Herc's face, smiling at her as he offered her a way out. "Pick door number 1. "What are you saying?" she said. But she knew. She knew exactly what he was saying. She just had to hear him actually say it. "You didn't kill him." He spat the words out like they were rotten fruit, running a hand through his thinning hair. "You didn't kill him, Pan. You knocked him halfway to Sunday, caved in his head so much he had to have a metal plate fitted. It hasn't ever been right. He's been under medical supervision for 4 years now. But he didn't die." The chopper might as well have crashed, because Pam's world was suddenly burning phosphorus bright. She was blinded by it. She pushed her head between her knees, a low, awful groan spilling out of her. He wasn't dead. She hadn't killed him. And the numbness was suddenly something else, something that rose up inside her, erupting from her mouth. She screamed, pounding at Herc, his chest, his face, scratching at him. The chopper rocked wildly, but he didn't fight back. He just sat there and let her hit him until the rage drained out of her, the shock, the fear, the relief. Until there was nothing left inside her but that sound, thunk thud, the one she'd carried inside her for so long. She fell still, unable to move because Herc had cut the strings that had held her up for so long, that had kept her going. He wasn't dead. "I'm sorry, Pan," Herc said. "I had to. You never would have come. You never would have come." She tried to speak, but she couldn't summon the words. Something inside her had fundamentally shifted. Christoph's death had defined her. It had made her a killer, and everything that followed had been drawn from that. It felt as if the child she had been, the one who had picked up that lamp and swung it at Christoph's head, had somehow been erased, and everything she had been since then was disappearing too, eradicated from history. She felt like if she sat here she would gradually fade away, never have been. "I'm sorry," Herc said again. "I'm sorry, but you were the best we had, Pan. I didn't know it at the time, but I know it now. You were the best we had. And if I had to do it again, if I had to look you in the eye and tell you you were a murderer, I would. You saved the world. Everything you did, you held off the darkness." Until now, she thought. She looked down to see the devil as it burned after Marlowe, whip cracks of dark lightning carving through the skies above it. "It would have happened a lot sooner without you," he said, reading her mind. Where would she be if Herc had never shown his ugly face? The cops might have let her go and she'd be sitting in her room right now, maybe, or in a class at school, or just walking down the street, oblivious to everything. There would have been no engine, no Ostheim, no Marlowe, and no hell. There would have been the devil, though. She'd have looked up from her desk, from her phone, from her ordinary life, and she'd have seen the darkness overhead, the impossible storm that gathered. She'd have been just like the others, running and screaming and lost. At least here, now, she knew what it was. At least she could fight it. Herc had given her that. She sat up in her seat, so woozy that she might have been drunk. Herc flinched as if she might start hitting him again. He had a smudge of blood beneath his nose, and when she looked at her knuckles, she saw more of it there. "Oh, I'm sorry, he said again. "I never should have." "Priorities," she said, her voice robotic. "We survive this, we can talk about it then." He nodded sadly, offering her a hand. She stared at it for a moment, thinking back to her cell. He'd offered her the same hand then, so much bigger in her memory, so much stronger. "Choices. Pick door number 1 and you join us. You help save the world." What he'd done to her was wrong. It was unforgivable. But it was done. She had to live with it. Christoph might still be alive, but it was his death, his not death, that had driven her into the arms of Ostheim. And how many more had she killed in his name? How many more had she sent to hell? So nothing had really changed. She was still a killer. "Let's do it," she said, taking Herc's hand. "What are we waiting for?" Herc nodded, banked the chopper, and the end of the world rose into view. The devil was a spiralling vortex with a core of absolute darkness. Pan couldn't look directly at it, but she kept seeing staccato bursts of light at street level, there for a second and then gone. They were almost like gunshots, only Pan knew what they were. Men, women, children exploding into fire and then dust. It trailed a wake of nothing, the land scorched to dust, all the way back to Greenville. The chopper shook, caught in an updraft from the destruction below. An alarm sounded and Herc mashed the heel of his hand against the control panel until it stopped. "Damn thing," he growled. A pulse of black light rippled up through a building beneath her, blasting out the windows like demolition charges. Herc yanked the stick, Pan's stomach trying to clamber to safety out of her mouth. The chopper shook hard, the windshield full of the inferno that churned into the clouds. The building slumped, not collapsing, just leaning to the side like it was exhausted. Glass and metal rained to the earth in what looked like slow motion, reflecting the sun. Most of its skin had been ripped away, girders sticking out like bare bones. Pan looked at its skeletal form, at the clouds of ash that danced around its burning base. She looked, and she suddenly understood what she was seeing. "Hell," she said. "This is where it begins." The toppled buildings, the wasteland, the mountains of the dead. None of it made sense. It made her head hurt just trying to think about it. But wasn't that what the watchmaker, or whatever Marlowe had called him, wasn't that what he'd said? He'd kept the devil prisoner until the future. Until this future. And the fear that washed through her was like acid, burning every cell. Because if they didn't do something now, right now, then there would be nothing left here but corpses and cursed souls. It would be hell on earth, pure and simple. "Time's up," Pan said, staring through the dust, looking for Marlowe. It wasn't hard to find him again, and the devil chasing them like a shadow, all of them heading for what looked like a shopping mall. Even as she watched, she saw a pulse of black light burst from the devil, a shockwave that shunted the semi off the road and into the parking lot. They didn't slow, just churned their way through cars, heading right for a store. "Oh, God damn it," said Herc, craning up in his seat to watch them. "They wouldn't." They did. The truck slamming into the front of the building, vanishing in a cloak of smoke. The devil was halfway across the parking lot, and even up here, even over the roar of the rotors, she could hear it speak. Herc pushed the stick, and the chopper angled earthward. "Drop me down there," she said. I'll think of something." "Pan," said Herc, swinging the chopper around, "I can tell you absolutely and positively that it isn't going to happen." "Where are you going?" she said, watching as the devil closed in on the building. She thought it might be a Walmart. "Herc, if Marlowe's in there, we have to do everything we can to stop it getting to him. Because if there's a chance, even the slightest chance that we can stop this from happening, then—" "I know that, Pan," said Herc. "You know, you really do have the habit of stating the bloody obvious." "Then what?" she asked, the chopper aiming for a low building across the street. "How are we—" The chopper juddered as Herc lowered them, Pan gritting her teeth until they were hovering over the roof. She looked down, and suddenly she knew what he was planning to do. "Don't you dare," she said. "Don't you even think about it." Hey, he said, shrugging. I'm getting too old for this, kiddo, and I've done too many bad things. Herc, she said, taking hold of his hand. I mean it. There's another way. You don't even know if this will work. We don't know it won't, he said. You're clear. She glanced out of the window to see the roof 10 feet below, the chopper weaving dangerously from side to side. She ignored it, turning back to Herc, holding his big bear's paw as tight as she could. I won't let you, she said. We can think of something else. Listen to me, he said, squeezing her hands in his. He fixed those watery eyes on her and he smiled, all scars and broken teeth. Listen to me, Pan. We've been through a lot together, you and I. Christ, we've been through a lot. But everything we've done has been to stop that thing over there. That's all this is, a job. But it's been an honour working with you, soldier, he said, his jaw trembling. He wiped his eyes. I'm sorry I did what I did. I'm sorry for it all. But I did it for the right reasons. Don't be sorry, she said, brushing away a tear of her own on her shoulder. It doesn't matter. I wouldn't have done it any differently either. I would still have picked door number 1. I'd pick it every single time. He smiled again. His face was a mess, but that smile was the brightest thing in the world. It had welcomed her home from 100 missions, the first thing she'd seen each time she'd escaped hell. The thought that she might not see it again was like a piece of her own being had been torn away. She gripped his hand, hard enough to hurt his fingers. This is my penance, Pan. It's my way of making it all right. You've got nothing to make right, she said. Nothing. He nodded, the tears rolling freely now. I can't land this damn thing anyway, he said. Doing it this way just saves me the embarrassment. The laugh escaped her before she could stop it, and she lunged at him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. He yelped, fought to control the chopper, hugging her back with his free hand. She pushed her face into his chest, breathing in that Old Spice smell of him one last time. Then she let go, a sob forcing its way up from deep inside her. I love you, Pan, he said. Whatever happens next, if this thing survives, kick its goddamned ass right back to hell. I will, she said, I promise. Go on, he said, turning to the windshield, hunched over the stick like a big kid on a toy. Go on now. She popped the door, suddenly gripped by noise, by the howling wind. She shuffled out onto the runners, looking back once, barely able to see him through the tears. You're a good man, Herman Cole, she said. Then she dropped. The fall was longer than she'd anticipated, and she struck hard, a spasm riding its way up her spine as she toppled backwards. By the time she'd recovered, the chopper had banked back the way they'd come, the thrum of the blades fading as it disappeared beneath the roof. Pan tore off her headphones and ran after it, through the heat, skidding to the edge and almost losing herself to gravity. She called Herc's name, but her voice was a ghost's, lost in the storm. The helicopter rose, circled clumsily, then dropped fast, its angle too steep, heading right for the cloud of darkness that stepped up to the shopping mall. She held out a hand to Herc, wanting him to pull up, to race back to her, to grin that toothless grin out of the chopper window and say, I've got another plan! She just wanted the devil to curl up and die, to falter and fall like it had done last time. But it wasn't going to happen. The helicopter thumped into the devil, seemed to pause for a second, then erupted into fire. The air around Pan shook, as if the entire world had taken a breath in shock. And she took a breath in shock too, because she couldn't believe it. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. A peal of thunder broke out, rolling towards her like a physical thing. It knocked her to her knees, to her elbows, and she did the only thing she could think to do. She put her head on the rooftop, whispered Herc's name, and started to cry. Oh, Herc! We love you, Herc. That was really sad. I've forgotten about that. But crashing the helicopter like that injured Marlowe, made the blood come out of his hand, let him open the canister. So Herc really did, well, I don't know if the day's going to be saved fully yet, but Herc really did save the day there. In the original draft of this that I wrote, Herc and Pan actually went and got a nuke and then dropped a nuke on the devil, but it just felt a little bit too crazy. So that got cut out, which is quite sad in a way because that was still quite cool and Herc still died. But still, this is cool. This is cool. One last deal. That drink is gross. The darkness sluiced into Marlowe's head, deeper than the night, worse even than the black pool. It filled his skull, his heart, his lungs. It occupied every cell, drowning him from the inside out. But it wasn't a close darkness. It wasn't suffocating. There was something different about this, because he knew somehow that this was all there was, an endless void of nothing. The thought of it, of that gaping absence, made him open his mouth and loose a silent, deafening howl. He could feel the poisonous arteries of the devil's heart burrowing into him, working their way up his arms, searching. But he couldn't fight them. He couldn't move. They wriggled beneath his skin, beneath his muscles, coiling around his bones, as cold as ice and as hot as molten lead. He screamed as the first of them brushed against his spine. A voice that wasn't really a voice filled his head, a language without words bursting inside him like a lightless firework. There was somebody there, something, a shadow against the night. Marlowe understood that this thing was as old as time, older even, a creature that had burned its way through reality before there was even a reality to explore, a creature that had created reality as it went. The wordless voice showed him things he couldn't even comprehend, explosions that birthed universes, played out in the blink of an eye that he couldn't actually blink. Stars forming from the chaos and planets forming around those stars. And even amidst all this light there was darkness, its darkness, that pulsing core of inverse matter that stalked the unthinkable distances between the galaxies. And it wasn't alone, this thing. It was not safe. Marlowe could sense an emotion that was unlike anything he'd ever felt, so powerful he might melt beneath the sheer force of it. It was terror. The terror of a creature who knows that soon it will die. More churning motion, and Marlowe watched as this shape of infinite darkness split itself, not through space but beyond it, separating into 7 shards of impossible light that scattered through the universes. It was the only way, the voice showed him, the only way to stay safe and to stay hidden. 7 pieces of the same being, hiding in 7 alternate realities. 7 strangers, that unvoice said, because in dividing they lost one another, they lost themselves. The scene shifted, I'm glowing again, sorry. The scene shifted again, bringing Marlowe home to a place he knew so well now, a burning watchmaker weeping for his lost children, and one of the 7 strangers coiling out of the smoke. It had been hiding there for so long, waiting for the right time, for the right person. It had watched, it had learned, it had a language now, and Marlowe heard that voice again. "It is done." And he saw the creature's blood that had boiled in its veins since the very start of everything, bubble and blister its way into the watchmaker. The man's scream was so loud it shattered the vision to pieces, but Marlowe could still hear his voice, his desperate pleas. "Give them back to me, bring my children home." "The love for a child is the most powerful thing in the universe." Marlowe wasn't sure if the voice came from the memory or from somewhere else. It was a whisper rather than a shout, sliding into his ear like a needle. He tried to turn his head, but he had no control, and there was nothing to see, just that infinite void. Until something began to swim out of it. A scene like a movie in fast forward. He saw Ostheim, the boy who wasn't really a boy who was born from the engine. A boy who was born from the stranger. Marlowe saw him live in the engine with his true father, with this serpent of smoke and shadow. He saw him feed on blood, saw him grow into something monstrous, something that wore its human face like a mask. And that face changed, losing its hair, its vitality, its youth, but never losing the darkness that swam just beneath the skin. "I don't understand," Marlowe said in a voice made of silence. "I don't know why you're showing me this." "You will," said the voice. Time and matter imploded again, Marlowe's stomach flipping like he'd been launched from a catapult. He fell into more light, so bright it was like a blowtorch held to his retinas. For a moment he didn't understand where he was. Then he saw the stones, arranged in perfect lines, one for each dead body resting beneath the earth, and he understood. Arlington. He heard her before he saw her, sobs that echoed off the stones which rose into the sky like doves. And when he turned his head there was his mum, so much younger, so much healthier, Only her face was the same, warped with an expression of grief that she'd tried to hide in the years since Danny's death, but which she'd never managed to remove. She was holding on to somebody Marlowe didn't recognise, somebody in full ceremonial uniform. There were dozens of people there, all clustered around a small, dark hole in the ground. Marlowe knew who was inside the coffin that lay there. His brother. "Danny," he said, reaching out for him with a hand he didn't possess. He scanned the crowds, looking for himself. He didn't remember the funeral. He'd been too young, surely. Or maybe it was because he hadn't been there, because he couldn't see himself. His mum wouldn't have let him go, he realised. It would have been too traumatic. He reached back into the fog of his memory, but he couldn't recall her even talking about it. There was nothing there at all. The scene scrubbed forward. His mum alone now inside their house, the walls freshly painted, the carpets clean, photographs hanging on every wall. He tried to make out who was in them, seeing his mum, seeing Danny, but no photographs of him, no photographs of Marlowe. He squirmed against the memory, wanting to go to his mum as she opened up a grocery bag, as she pulled out a bottle of Bacardi, sobbing uncontrollably as she unscrewed the cap. And in the moments that followed, 100 days bunched into one awful, endless swallow, he saw her age, saw her deflate into herself, saw her crumble into ruin. And there was still no sign of him. It didn't make any sense. The memory shuddered back into real time with the sound of a knock on the door. And even here, bodiless and alone, Marlowe felt that pinch of terror at the base of his spine. He wanted to tell her not to open it, just to sit in the dark and wait for the caller to leave. But his mum wobbled to her feet and called out a word that broke Marlowe's heart. "Danny?" She rushed from the room, down the hall, bouncing off the wall. A silhouette filled the glass panel, something that looked too big to be a man. Shadows squirming there, like they were trying to find a way in. But they didn't need to, because his mum wrenched open the door, letting them flood forward, drowning the house in darkness. A man stood there. A man with an impossible face. A man who pushed lank strands of hair back over his balding head and flashed his mum a vicious smile. It was Sheppel Ostheim. "No," said Marlowe, trying to pull the memory inside himself, trying to rip it away from the man at the door, but he was powerless here, and all he could do was watch as Ostheim strode into his mum's house, walking into the living room like he owned the place. And his mum just followed him. She didn't call the cops, she didn't ask him to leave, she just trod in his shadow like a beaten dog, collapsing onto her knees before him. "Leave her alone!" Marlowe screamed, watching Ostheim run a hand down her face and cup her chin. His fear was like an ocean in a storm, enough to pull him to pieces, but he couldn't fight the paralysis. He couldn't help his mum, couldn't even turn away. He could only watch as Ostheim leaned in, brushed his mum's greasy hair from her ear, and whispered, "I can give you back a son." "No," Marlowe said. "I can make you a mother again." "No! It won't be the one you lost, of course. But he will be just as good and just as kind. No. Please. And you will love him as if he were real. Please, God, no. All you have to do is say yes." "Oh, please, Mum, don't." "All you have to do is say yes, and your house will no longer be empty. It will no longer be sad." "Mum!" "All you have to do is say yes." "Say no!" Marlowe screamed, but it was pointless because all of this had already happened. It was pointless because he already knew what his mum had said. Hadn't he always known it, somewhere in the deepest part of him? Because there had never been any memories, there had never been any childhood, there had only been that one awful word. Yes. Ostheim lifted his head and howled his laughter out into the memory, shattering it. When it reformed, Marlowe saw a bedroom, his bedroom, the floorboards bare, wallpaper hanging like peeling skin. One corner was shrouded in darkness, sinkhole deep, but something was walking out of it. A boy, maybe 5 or 6, his eyes 2 black marbles. They were doll's eyes, looking like they might just roll out of their sockets. His mum ran into the room, her sobs the loudest sound in the world. She dropped to her knees before the child and swallowed him up in a hug. The boy didn't react, he just rolled those dead eyes to where Marlowe floated. And smiled. "No, no, 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 no," Marlowe screamed, fighting the memory, watching him as he watched back and feeling the fury like a cold, dense explosion inside him. "The love for a child is the most powerful thing in the universe," said the voice, that scalpel-sharp whisper. There was no escaping the truth. It sat in Marlowe's head like a beacon, but the stranger spoke it anyway. "You are my child." The boy in the memory was him. "You are mine." And the creature that had begun its life before the universe had been formed, before the stars, before worlds, before time, the creature whose blood had corrupted countless souls, whose touch had reduced men to monsters and children to something even worse. The creature who was tearing its way through the world, who wanted to turn the living to dust, who wanted to make this place into hell. It was his father. "Marlowe, I am your father." I'd forgotten that too. There you go. So Marlowe was made as part of a deal with the devil. His mum made a deal with the devil for a son, and he was the result. So what does that make him? That's interesting. We shall find out. We're on to part 3. The devil's in the house. Like father, like son. His rage was powerful enough to blow away the last scraps of the memory. It picked him up in a fist of sound and fury and dragged him back to the world. It was like waking from a nightmare, and he opened his mouth and screamed, a noise that roared from him like fire, which ripped through the shelves of the aisle, which tore loose the steel beams from the ceiling. He was on his knees, and he clenched his fists, pounding at the ground, filling the air with dust. There was no pain, there was only anger, cold and infinitely deep. He was born from a deal with the devil. No, he had been forged with the blood of the stranger. No, he was not real. No, he was not real. No, he was not real. He screamed again, searching for anything in his head that might undermine the truth. But there was nothing there, nothing to remember. Because everything he was, everything he had ever been, had begun when he was 5 years old and he had stepped from that web of shadow. "Marlowe?" He looked up, the world swimming in shades of black and silver like he was watching an old-fashioned movie. Somebody was standing in front of him, a rabbit caught in the dark light of his rage. It took him a moment to remember her name, Charlie, but he didn't speak it. There was no point. How could he have had friends? Real friends. How could he have friends? Real friends when he was not real? "Marlowe," Charlie yelled, holding out his hand. "Just hang on, I can help." But his words were insect small, and Marlowe waved them away, seeing the devil's heart still hanging from his fist. It threw out sickening waves of dark light, like a lighthouse, thrumming so loudly that the vibration travelled through every one of his bones. A dozen thick, ropey veins had penetrated his skin, and more were shivering up his wrist, stretching like plant fronds. He saw that they were inside his shoulder. They bridged the gap to his chest, his neck. He could feel them inside him, probing, reaching, the disgust dwarfed by that same violent tide that roiled inside his skull. "I am not real." He growled like an injured dog, but there was nothing He growled like an injured dog, but there was nothing weak about him now. The devil's heart was pumping, the arteries bulging with the force of some new circulation. His own veins had turned black, straining against his skin, that poisoned blood hurtling through his system like a drug. He arched his back and screamed again, a wordless cry that flew from him like a weapon. Charlie dived away, head in his hands. Marlowe stood and took a step. The heart swung from his wrist, but the stringy tendons that connected to him were retracting. It was reeling itself closer, resting wetly against his skin, pumping. Somewhere, in some distant part of his mind, he knew that he should tear it loose, knew that he should grab a knife and saw at those veins until this rancid piece of the devil fell to the ground. He knew he should stamp on it until it was jelly. But he didn't. He felt stronger than he had in years, stronger than ever, stronger even than when he'd burst free from the engine after his first deal with the strength of 10 men. He felt like he had the strength of 100 men now, 1,000. He had the strength of the entire human species. And he knew why. Because I am not real. Another sound forced its way from him, a guttural, choking laugh. I am not real! It should have terrified him. But there was still only anger, his skull full of the dark horror of it. Only anger and a flicker of something else, something he hadn't felt since the last time he made a deal. Excitement. The devil was on the threshold of Walmart, but something had happened to it. Pieces of machinery scattered across the blackened ground. The world was burning there, the creature squirming inside the flames. It was hurting. It needed its heart more than ever now. The corrupted organ beat against Marlowe's skin, and he put a black-veined hand to it. Somewhere he could hear Charlie screaming at him. "Destroy it! What are you doing?" Marlowe's rage burned too fiercely, too brightly. He couldn't see anything past it, except one thing. He ran through the ruin of the store, punching out of the side wall like it was made of paper. The devil's heart clung to him, beating out a frantic rhythm, filling him with cold fury. It must have known that its master was close because it was twitching, the veins in his arm tugging at him like a horse's reins. "No!" he said again, but his own voice seemed further away than ever, like he was drowning inside himself, sinking into an ocean of blood. He bunched his fist and struck himself on the head, screaming, "Get out, get out, get out!" But the call of it was too loud and too powerful. "I'm not real, I'm not real!" He chanted it because surely it was easier if he just accepted it. If he accepted that he had never been born, that his mum had never loved him, that he was just this terrible union of loss, grief, and a deal with the devil. "I'm not real." The heart was pounding so fast its beats were just a blur. Marlowe's vision pulsing black and red. He was growling, a noise that sounded as far from human as anything he'd ever heard. It was the sound made by a monster. Because he was a monster. He thought of his mum, the way she'd never looked at him like she'd looked at those photographs of Danny, the way she'd always compared him with Danny, the way she'd said she would never love him like she loved Danny. His mum had made him a monster. He loosed another animal howl that rocketed over the city. The darkness behind him was growing deeper, the devil recovering. But it wasn't the devil he wanted answers from. Snorting like a bull, he turned south. He sniffed the air, smoke and blood and burning flesh. Then he started running again, away from the darkness. He galloped on all fours, his fists gouging holes in the asphalt as he bounded through the parking lot. He vaulted onto a burning car, leaping onto the roof of a van, leapfrogging his way through the carnage. The world tore past him in a blur, like it too was no longer real. Ahead was a bridge, clogged with traffic, and he carved a path through it. People swarmed like ants, their mouths open as if they were screaming, but all he could hear was the roar of the devil's blood in his skull and the endless howl of his own rage. He ran, and he ran, and he ran until at last he began to slow. Each ragged breath was like a grenade going off, sending plumes of dust out across the street. The houses to either side of him were shut tight, but he could sense the people inside, watching him. He didn't care. It meant nothing to him. He was only interested in one house, and he had reached it now. It sat there, slumped and miserable, its blue paint peeling. The curtains were closed the way they had been since Danny's wake, since the moment that Marlowe had crawled from the shadows. He stood in front of it, trying once again to remember anything, trying to remember one scrap of truth that would make the devil's story a lie, and finding nothing. "I'm not real." He opened his mouth, fired out a single word that shook the street, that exploded the windows of his house, and ripped open the door. "Mom!" Sorry, that was a bit scary. We got time for another one. Maybe two. We're so close to the end. Chasing Devils. Have another sip of my horrible drink. Pan burst out of the stairwell into the lobby, stopping for a moment to catch her breath. She was in a home improvement store, people either streaming out of the doors or hiding in the aisles. The air was drenched with smoke and screams. "Oh, what did you do, Herc?" Thinking about him was too painful. She almost hadn't been able to stop crying, almost hadn't been able to get back up. But she had to see if it had been worth it, if his sacrifice had blown the devil to pieces. She burst into the parking lot, half of it erased by the devil, half by Herc. The fire was moving quickly, devouring the Walmart where Marlowe had hid him. There was a mass of shadow in front of it, a pocket of darkness that seemed to fight with the flames. She squinted, seeing a broken figure there, patching itself together again. Then she had to turn away, momentarily blinded. A scream, Nothing human about it. She peered through her fingers, seeing somebody explode from the inside of the same building. It moved like a demon, too fast, but when she managed to focus on it, she understood it wasn't a demon at all. It was Marlowe. He opened his mouth and screamed again, a wave of sound ripping across the street. There was something wrong with his skin, but she couldn't work out what. Then he was moving again, dropping onto all fours and galloping down the street. He was moving so fast that by the time she'd called out his name, he was gone. She saw it, though. She saw the thing that had burrowed into the flesh of his arm. The heart. Behind Marlowe, the devil was pulling itself free of the wreckage of the flames. It loosed a roar that threatened to shake the city to dust, a column of darkness rising into the sky, flickering tendrils of inverse light winding through it. The bastard was still alive. "Oh, you idiot, Herc," she said, fighting her way through the panicked crowds. Somebody grabbed at her, clutching a handful of her shirt, a man, his eyes on the verge of madness. Please, what's wrong?" he said. And then he took a look at her, the copper filaments of her eyes. "What's wrong with you?" She had her mouth open to answer, but she never got the chance. A mass of rippling pink muscle thumped past her and slammed into the man, ripping him away in a shower of blood. The demon pinned him to the ground and tore him in half with a single snap of its jaws. It didn't even stop to eat. It just looked back at Pan. "Come on then," she said. It charged for her and she threw herself behind a parked car, the vehicle shunting into her as the demon shouldered past it. There were too many people here, all of them screaming, and it rampaged among them. She knew what it felt like, to be torn in two, and the thought of those claws inside her neck, the teeth crunching her skull like it was an ice cube, drove her back onto her feet. She punched her way through the maelstrom, leaving the shadow of the buildings, the highway coming into view again. From the look of it, I'm glowing so badly now. From the look of it, Marlowe was still heading south, the devil on his tail. Pan put her hands to her head, another cold, dark vortex spinning inside her. She was powerless here. No weapons, no contract, no backup. Herc was dead. Night was in hell. Truck was 1,000 miles away. For all she knew, Charlie had been torn to pieces as well. And Marlowe was something else. Something bad. She had never felt more alone. More demons were appearing. She could hear the ugly of their laughter as they went to work. There was nowhere left to run, and even if she did make it out of the city, what then? She'd have to keep moving as those waves of darkness chased her. The east coast would fall in hours. How long would it take for the devil to devour the world? She swore, looking at the storm again as it moved south. Where the hell were they going? Think, Pan. But it was impossible, because even now somebody behind her was pinned beneath two demons. Another appeared, running past her like she didn't exist. More were stampeding that way, as if they'd spotted something over there, spotted prey, or as if they'd been called. Think. The devil was moving south. The demons were flocking the same way. Think. Pan! The sound of her name was so alien that she wasn't sure it was real. She turned, looking through the crowds into the mess of Walmart. Was that Charlie there? He was so covered in blood and dirt that he didn't even look human. He clung to the wall, limping, and she saw the tear in his pants, the bone poking out of his leg. Checking the coast was clear, she bolted to him. "What happened?" she asked. "The heart," he said, grimacing against the agony. "He got it free. Where's he going?" Charlie shrugged, staring at the shrinking cloud of darkness. Pan's mind was a mess of noise, of blood, of smoke. It was like she was back in hell, back in that hurricane of confusion. She watched the buildings burn. She breathed in that choking cloud of ash. She might as well be still be there, sitting on that damned pyramid as the devil or the stranger or whatever the hell he was called strode from the ruin of Marlowe's house. A thought flickered right at the back of her head, blown out as another demon bounded past, its muzzle spraying. She tried to ignite it again, her mind soaked through with blood and sweat. Hell, the devil's lair. The impossible building that had sat right in the middle of it all. She looked up, everything still swarming, that cyclone of darkness almost on her. She stared at Charlie, and he'd obviously had the exact same thought because they said it together. Staten Island. Marlowe was heading home. "Come on," she said, but Charlie didn't move. "Not this time," he said, looking at his mangled leg. "Go get him, Pan. Be careful, yeah?" Pan took a breath. pushed herself forward. The crowd was moving in every direction now, and she put her head down, charging through them, wishing she still had her electromagnetic charge so that she could scatter them like pigeons. She scanned the lot, searching the cars. Somehow or other, she'd get to Staten Island. She'd get to Marlow. There was only one thing she was sure of. She was going to be there when it ended. These are quite short, so I'll do one more. Aqua Libra sparkling water infused with raspberry and blackcurrant and drains, apparently. Give me a Coke any day. This last chapter that we're going to read is called Confession. Mum! Marlowe howled her name again, and this time his voice was strong enough to rip down the porch, scattering wood. The whole house seemed to shudder in fear, the front door flapping on its hinges like a mouth. Go away, go away, go away, it seemed to say. The heart pulsed against his skin, its echo inside every cell as it called to his master. Somewhere behind him the devil was coming, driven by the last of Ostheim's blood. But there was time. Marlowe wasn't going anywhere until he heard the truth. Barking from inside, a shape appeared in the doorway. It was Donovan. The dog worked up into such a frenzy that he was spitting foam. He threw himself from wall to wall, his hackles raised, his eyes boring into Marlowe. The sight of him was almost enough to break through the fury, a beam of sunlight in the storm. Then she appeared, staggering up behind the dog, and a supernova of emotion boiled his heart to dust. His mum stood there, a shadow of herself. Even from here in the middle of the street he could see her trembling. Donovan ran from the house, standing at the top of the steps, barking at Marlowe like he'd seen the devil himself. And the dog was right, wasn't he? Marlowe might have had him fooled for all these years, but the truth was he was the spawn of something infinitely evil. Who else could stand here with the devil's heart fused to his body, with the devil's blood pounding through his arteries? Mum! He yelled again, his voice a weapon that blasted shingles from the roof, that sent Donovan skittering back. The dog barked again, then launched himself down the stairs, his teeth sharper than they'd ever looked. Marlowe held out a hand, those black veins pulsing. No! He said, and the force of the word hit Donovan like an invisible boot, kicking him down the street. Oh no, Donovan! The gears of his rage seemed to stick, his head roaring as they ground, strained, then burned into motion again. He ignored the whining dog and started up the stairs. His mum was backing away, screaming at him, but there was nowhere for her to go. She couldn't escape it. She had to have known this day would come sooner or later. You couldn't make a deal with the devil and not expect to pay the price. He had to duck to get through the door, his body growing, swelling with the volume of infernal blood that pumped through him. His mum backed into the living room, bouncing off the wall. She couldn't take her eyes off him. She was muttering prayers beneath her breath, but it wouldn't do her any good. The only God here now was him. He followed her through, punching the wall and showering her with bricks and dust. She was too scared to scream this time, tripping on an empty bottle and falling onto the couch. Her mouth opened and closed like a landed fish, like she was trying to call his name. He walked towards her, his head hitting the light and filling the room with sweeping shadows. It was here that it had happened, he realised. Right here. Ostheim had sat on this very couch, his mum had fallen prostrate before him, and together they had conjured him into being. His anger, his hate for them both didn't even need a voice anymore. It radiated from him, shaking the walls so much that plaster dust rained down from the ceiling, gathering in his mouth like ash. The heart thumped its demented rhythm, the loudest sound in the world. "Why?" he said, his voice filling the room like a thunderclap. His mum clamped her hands to her ears, still mumbling those prayers. Marlowe leaned over her, resisting every urge to just pick her up and throw her into the wall. "Wait," part of him said, but it was a part buried so deep that it was nothing more than a whisper, quickly forgotten. "Why?" She sobbed, holding a cushion to her face like she meant to suffocate. He bent down and pulled it away, the fabric tearing, spitting feathers. His mum moaned, scrubbing at her eyes with her fists. She said something, but it was lost behind the jet engine roar of Marlowe's emotions. "Why?" "Danny!" she screamed at him, and the last trace of doubt burst from his head. Here was the truth, right here, written in her tears, in the lines that etched her face, in the defiance as she stared up at him. "Danny, I need you! Please, please!" Marlowe shook his head, grabbing his face like he could just tear it off to reveal something else behind it. An inferno was raging inside him, the pressure of it too much. It was going to detonate, and he felt like he might take the entire world with him. And what did it matter if he did? I am not real. Because he'd never truly been a part of the world anyway. "I loved him so much," said his mum, curling her legs up beneath her, her eyes big and wet and frightened, a child's eyes. "I don't understand." She groaned again as if the truth were being physically ripped out of her. "I don't understand what you are. It was never supposed to be this way. It would never have been this way if Danny had still been alive. Please, Marlowe." She stopped, like it hurt to speak his name. She had to be lying, or maybe she didn't remember. Maybe the years of drink had just washed the shame and the horror away. But there was no denying it, was there? His mum might not have forged a contract with the engine, but she traded with the devil. It had used its tainted blood to build Marlowe from darkness. "I thought I could love you," said his mum. "I thought it would make it better. I thought I could love you like you were my son. And I did love you." Again his name got caught in her throat like a chunk of rancid meat. "I did love you. I did love you." She glanced up at him and her face seemed to slide off the bone. "But I couldn't love you as much as I loved him. I couldn't forget where you'd come from and what..." She burrowed her head into her legs, sobbing, but he could still make out her muffled words. "Or what you would become." The pressure inside his head was so great that it was whistling, a shrill sound that might have been his skull about to shatter. The scream rose like vomit and he turned, opening his mouth and loosing it towards the window. It ripped out of him, a fist of sound that tore away the entire front wall, blasting wreckage into a street that had turned twilight dark. The house moaned, the ceiling cracking above his head. He didn't care. Let it bury him. Let it be done with them both. "I always knew it," she said. "I always knew I'd lose you too, but not like this, not like this. I loved you almost as much, I swear it, but I knew." "What?" he asked. "I always knew you'd raise hell." Marlowe reeled, reaching for the wall to steady himself. His hand punched into the bricks and he squeezed them into shrapnel, ripping them away and blasting them out into the street like bullets. It couldn't be real. Ostheim had known everything. He'd planned everything. Everything Marlowe ever was had been orchestrated for one simple purpose. To open the gates of hell. To let the devil step out into the world. He saw the way he'd been kicked out of school, the way that Pan and Herc just happened to be battling demons across the neighbourhood. What were the chances of that? Ostheim had sent them there for one reason, to draw him in. He remembered the way he'd stumbled into that parking lot, gun in hand. Why would anyone sane, anyone real, step out of the daylight and walk towards chaos? It had been inside him all this time, the part of him that somehow knew he'd been raising hell, and everything that had happened since, telling Charlie he couldn't join them, setting him up to meet Mammon and infiltrate the engine, then working out where Mammon was and leading Ostheim right to him, paving the way for him to unite the engines and open the gates, finding Meridiana, sentencing her to death, and getting a contract that would expire in minutes. Hell, too. He'd always been destined to go there, to meet his maker first hand, to broker one final deal that would open the gates and allow the devil to come home. Every single thing he'd done had been programmed into him. He was a puppet, a shadow thing, soulless and corrupt. The devil's heart thumped, still swelling, as big as a football now. The veins that stretched from it, that had burrowed into his skin, were as thick as fingers and as hard as steel, still pumping him full of blood. And there was good reason for its excitement. Outside, the world was gripped by night, as if the sun had been shot from the sky. The room was juddering, and across the street the houses were caught up in a frenzy of dark light, tearing themselves to pieces. The air pulsed with a voice, with its voice. Marlowe stumbled towards the ruined wall, out into the fury of sound and violence. The devil was walking up the street. It was almost impossible to look at it. The world seemed to blister as it approached, pockets of reality burning away, but its blood still blazed through Marlowe, through every cell, and he peered inside that bubble of black light with his new eyes. That too tall figure was there, its face opening and closing like origami, its eyes like black holes, pulling Marlowe in. It unfurled those insect arms as if it meant to embrace him, and as it did so, he understood the final piece of the puzzle. He understood the last thing that the devil needed him to do.
The love for a child is the most powerful thing in the universe.
The devil's voice wrapped itself around Marlowe. It threatened to shake his bones to dust, but there was no pain. The heart saw to that. Marlowe smiled as the devil stepped closer. The world hadn't made him. The world had never wanted him, but this thing, this God, had given him life and given him meaning, and all it asked for in return was his love.
You are my child.
I am your child, he said. The shockwave from their voices cracking together, opening up a crater in the earth, splitting the clouds. The sheer power of it made Marlowe's smile stretch even further. He thought of his mum, of his principal, of Patrick and Ostheim and everyone else in his life who told him he was weak, told him he was not worthy of love. But wait till they saw him now. He would be a king here.
You will be a god.
The devil floated forwards, cradled inside its storm. The closer it got, the more Marlowe could see of it, those mechanisms still turning inside its skin, the empty space in its chest that screamed for a heart. It looked different from the last time he'd seen it, its skin ragged, oozing dark blood, its movements hesitant. Despite its fury, it was weak, and Marlowe knew that without him, it would die. "Ah, then let it die," he screamed from inside the well of himself. But even as he spoke the words, he was walking, then stumble-running into the hurricane.
All you have to do is say yes, the stranger said.
All it wanted was his love, and that was all he had to give. Smiling at the thought, Marlowe reached out, opened his arms, and said yes. "Oh, Marley, what are you doing?" The next chapter is called The End of Everything. But that's a lie, because there's at least like 4 chapters after that. We'll stop there. We might get it finished next time. There's about 50 pages left to read, so I might get it finished. So I'm glowing so much. We might get it finished. I think I'm going to put like a curtain up about there, and then you'll actually be able to see me. Not that you want to see me. I mean, maybe I'll look better like this.
The man with no face.
We might get it finished next time, but we'll see how we go. I hope you enjoyed that. It's really heating up. I'd forgotten about all this stuff about the deals with the devil and stuff. But I guess it seemed like the most logical place to take the story, didn't it? Because it's all about dealing with the devil and the idea that, you might not be real. And yeah, once again, we salute you, Herc. We love you. Thank you for your service. And yeah, sad times. But yeah, join me very soon for the either the penultimate or the ultimate part of the Devil's Engine trilogy. Have a lovely day, whatever it is you're doing, or a lovely night if you are going to sleep. And yeah, I will see you very soon. Toodaloo. Bye.